Okay, hey everyone, Phobos here, coming at you with the video you've all been waiting for, the Freezing Pulse totem build for 3.13. Sorry this took a lot longer, I probably should have made it sooner, but I kind of wanted to make sure I had everything figured out. There's still a couple things I may change, but this is going to be pretty solid, I think, and it's probably going to be the best all-case totem build. I'm going to be doing another one on Elementalist for Freeze Pulse, but for right now, I think this is going to be the far and away best option for Freezing Pulse totems. So, first Ascendancy Choice is Inquisitor. Templar Inquisitor. Why we go Inquisitor? It's just way more damage than Hierophant. So I've PoB'd the difference between... Hierophant, you get a little bit more defense, but the thing is, you don't even get really that much more defense. I would say you get a bit more ES. You don't have to invest quite as much into mana. But here's the problem: is like ultimately, you're not gaining a lot more health or anything like that, and because you're using Mind Over Matter as part of your defense, your health is like the limiting factor on how useful your mana is going to be, right? So if you can't really crack like the 5k HP threshold by going Hierophant, then there's really not a big reason to go Hierophant. Right now, you do get the Hierophant node that gives you like 10% more of your health is taken as mana, so that your MOM is actually at 40% instead of 30%. So that's definitely helpful to some degree, but you're probably only going to get like about, I don't know, you're going to get maybe 300 more effective health from your mana. In that case, you're going to have basically the same health and you're going to have a little bit more life. A little bit more energy shield. So you're definitely going to gain defenses, but the question you have to ask is it worth it? And my answer is no, because with the current setup here, like I think I'm at like 800, I think. Yeah, 800 and some K per totem. I'll link a PoB in the description. But yeah, it's like 800 and some K per totem, and you're barely cracking 400K per totem with Hierophant. You do get an extra totem, keep in mind. But yeah, you're like, I don't even think you're cracking that. You're like 360 or something like that. So huge difference. Just a lot less damage. And the other thing you have to consider is that it's not just the overall throughput damage, but like the ability to freeze shit on this build is a lot higher than the Hierophant version. And another thing to keep in mind is just that Inevitable Judgment, in my opinion, is actually really good on trash. Like, people think it's like good on bosses, and it is really good on bosses, right? But the thing about bosses is you can actually kind of like, you can stack resistance penning stuff fairly easily sometimes, especially with stuff like Arcanist Brand. So you could have like, I don't know, if you're doing like a lightning thing, right? You can do like a Wave of Conviction, Arcanist Brand, Conductivity, or something like that. That's already a ton of minus resist. You can use the Malachi's Artifice Ring, which now will allow you to use Elemental Equilibrium, because it gives Elemental Equilibrium to the one skill only, which allows you to use your normal skill and get the pen from it. So there's a lot of ways you can actually bring down like a single mob's resistance in this game and even make it go negative. And they're not like necessarily super large investments. The Malachi's Artifice thing technically is, but the problem really comes when you have like you're doing like really high level maps, and you want to be able to run like as many modifiers as possible, and you're getting stuff like the tons of like resist modifiers with, and then you're getting stuff like Enfeeble on you, and you basically just need a lot more damage than normal to clear and freeze. right? And when you have Inevitable Judgment, you don't have to worry, because the thing is, like, you're not going to have Frost Bomb down for every pack. You're not going to have, if you're doing like a lightning build, you're not going to have Wave of Conviction down for every pack. You're not going to have every pack cursed. So all these things that like look really good on your PoB for your single target damage to like Shaper or Sirius or something, they're not going to be present on the lower level mobs. Now the lower level mobs are squishier by definition than those mobs, but when you're augmenting them with map mods, it becomes a bit different, right? So it's just something to keep in mind, that Inevitable Judgment just really makes all that bullshit completely go away. Because you're going to be critting a lot, especially on trash, because your Diamond Flask is going to basically have like 100% uptime on trash. You kill so much shit, it's really easy to get it back. You don't have any problem sustaining it at all. So you're pretty much going to be critting nonstop on any type of trash. So that's just some thoughts on kind of like Inquisitor versus Hierophant and why I went Inquisitor. In terms of what's getting our damage, like obviously Inevitable Judgment's huge. This node, I wasn't sure how I felt about it first, but like the amount of crit you can get, like I have basically like 300 crit from this node, right? It's not really that hard. Strength is not a bad stat in general. It gives you just more life. Never a bad thing. If you wanted, you can even run the I don't know if you have enough strength in intelligence, but you might need a little bit more strength. But you can run the gloves that give you Iron Will. The thing about that is I don't think that unfortunately, like, Iron Will is not, I think it's only increased damage, so it's not really like that good. But yeah, it's just an option there, right? It's not bad to have. I'll go over the gear I'm actually using in a second. And then this node right here, 8% less elemental damage taken. This is actually the thing where, like, when you compare it to Hierophant and you're like, oh yeah, like Hierophant's more defensive, right? And then you're like, well, is it though? Because that's like a huge chunk of less elemental damage. And sure, physical damage is really dangerous, and you're going to be more protected against Hierophant having more raw HP with Hierophant against physical damage, but elemental damage is no joke. And as a range build, I feel like especially is going to account for some of that damage that you're encountering, and it's just really, really helpful to have 8% less damage taken. I think it is only from nearby enemies, right? But still, like, people think that you're not going to be close to enemies using totems. It's not necessarily true. I mean, when fighting a lot of mobs in the game, like Sirius, Izaro, stuff like that, you actually want to play close to them. That's kind of like the idea, right? So the only time that you're not going to be really close to something is when you're going to be intentionally abusing the totems to, like, off-screen it, like a metamorph or something, maybe. And in those cases, you don't really need any defense anyway. You could be like a fucking Delve build, and have like 300 energy shield and probably kill the mob, especially if your totems have taunt, which these do. So, yeah. And the thing that's really doing a lot of damage here, though, is Battle Mage. I mean, this node is just insane. You can see gains added spell damage equal to the damage of your main hand weapon. Right now, my weapon is not even really that good. But it's good enough where, like, it does a lot of damage. I had a weapon that did slightly more damage before, but it didn't have any cold damage on it, and I want the cold damage for the greater chance to, like, freeze and slow everything, if that makes sense. So yeah, this is just like a really strong weapon. And Battle Mage is super strong. Here's how I would tell you to... I'm going to just get into the weapon crafting now, and then we'll go into, like, the tree and the rest of the gear. Or probably go into the gear first, and then we'll look at the rest of the tree. What you really want, in my opinion, is you want to be using, like, Deafening Essences of Hatred on a fractured base that has something else good that you want. In this case, I picked Critical Strike Multi. But anything would kind of work that's good. So like a really high spell damage roll. I don't know if the temple mods can fracture, but if you could get one of those fractured on something, that'd be kind of insane. You could do cast speed would be another great one. I don't really like flat crit as much, although it is better with Inquisitor than it is with other builds, right? Because of Inevitable Judgment. So anything like that, and then you're just going to be using Deafening Essence of Hatred on it. The one thing that I would say is, like, I think I would prefer if it was a suffix. So I would be trying to go for, what I was looking for mostly is crit multi and cast speed. That way you have more chances to hit another high added roll, right? Because hitting the high added is really good. And to do that, you need a the tier for like tier 1 added cold or tier 1 added lightning is 82, I believe. So this is this is 82. Keep in mind though, if you can't afford to buy eye level 82 bases, because getting the right eye level 82 base can be a little expensive, you can still use lower than eye level 82 bases. You want to get the tier 2 one, which I think is like eye level 75. Those should be super cheap. And what you would just do is you would buy the best base possible at eye level 75. And then you're already going to be using the Deafening Essence of Hatred, so that the essence doesn't care what eye level the item is. It'll just put the mod on it. So you're already going to be guaranteed like one tier 1. So for example, like this scepter right here really wouldn't be any different if it was eye level 75. The only difference is that like the fractured multi-roll, I don't think would have been able to roll in this tier on this weapon because it's probably eye level 80 something. It'd probably have been a tier 2 multi-roll instead if it would have rolled max. So a little bit less multi if it was on eye level 75. But fundamentally the weapon's the same because the essence puts the cold damage on it. The +1 is super low level, the mana regen's nothing, and then the other spell damage thing is crafted. Right? So yeah, you don't really have to worry about that at all. If you're going for like max freeze potential too, you would craft the like 55 to 60 spell damage craft on here. But somebody actually just, I told somebody to put the non-chaos one on for me because I didn't have it. And they actually just tossed me the Exalt one because it's a good friend. So I was like, fuck it, I'll just keep that on there. It's really good. But yeah, if you really want max freeze potential, you'd go 55 to 66% spell damage because obviously extra chaos damage isn't freezing anything. But that's how you'd craft the weapon, in my opinion. Yeah. If you don't know what fractured mods are, they're just something from Synthesis where basically like one mod stays on the item the entire time. Harvest crafting can also help a lot with this type of stuff. So be on the lookout for good harvest stuff. The main thing I want to talk about with the gear though is this helm, because this is the new helm that comes with from killing Maven. I think I bought this one though because it's actually kind of like, it's not hard to get a good one. They're really cheap now. I bought this one kind of when it was still expensive though. But this is just a really good item because the hexproof shit still allows your curses to be on you and benefit you for the, what do you call it? What's the jewel we're using? Self-Lignation, right? So you're still getting the benefit, as you can see. Like, watch my damage go up, right? So, see, your damage still goes up. So yeah, like the fact that this works with that, and I did expect it to work with it. It's not that I didn't expect it to work with it. I just wanted to verify that it did do that before I like made the video and stuff like that. And these kind of took a little bit to come out. But yeah, it's just like really, really strong because you're basically hex proof. So something that that was really good about the build before, right, was that before they did the curse rework, if you get 100% reduced effective curses, you are curse immune in every map, right? Then they changed, so basically you would only need 75 all res even in like a red map. You know what I mean? Now, the problem came in when they did the curse rework. There was initially, I think, an issue with the Soul Mantle itself, but then they fixed that quickly. So it's not the Soul Mantle problem. They changed, what they did on the Soul Mantle, I believe, is they changed the wording to be a more. So they're almost like non-overlapping Magisteria in the terms more and reduced. So if you get reduced, it's like the first line of defense, if that makes sense. And if you have 100% reduced, you just don't get affected. Unless the map puts like additional effect of the curses on the map. And that's the problem, is they changed the map modifiers, I believe, so that instead of it just putting a higher level of the curse on, which is what it used to do before. So it used to be like vulnerability, LA weakness, and then the elemental curses. And they used to just start on like, I think level like 11, then they would go to 15, then they'd go to 20 in red maps. But then they changed it so that it actually, the curse is just always level 20 and it has more effect, as I believe what it was. So that kind of fucked up the Soul Mantle situation a little bit, where even if you had 100 curse effect, it's now eating into that, and you're still getting some effect on those curses when you go into the maps, as I think what happened. So it's really nice being able to run this helmet because you're just completely hexproof. You don't have to worry about any of that stupid bullshit. And it's actually like the cost for this build is not super insane or anything, because you don't get a ton of damage. It's not like a physical build, right? Where like you really want those steel rings with the double fizz on them. And you know what I mean? You really just need life and a res or something like that. Or life and, in this case, we actually have strength because we have an abundance of res. So running a magic ring is not really a huge cost here. Potentially, in terms of like if you're decking out the character completely and you're using the best possible stuff, like mirror tier gear, then at that point, becomes not as good. You're probably better off maybe using the Aetherius mirror. I'd have to like actually do a bunch of like high level, simulations in PoE with like really high level gear to figure that out. I don't know the answers right now, but for standard gearing, this is great, and it's just super simple. It's not like a super hard cost. And then if you want, you can run another blue here and be crit immune, which I'm potentially thinking of doing. It's just going to involve getting maybe a better neck or something and swapping some things around on gear, because I just want more decks to be able to not... The main thing is like, I want dexterity, and what I could do is I could just do a life dex ring here, right? With the same resistances, drop a little bit of mana regen, which I think would still be fine, and then drop some crit with the strength, drop a little bit of health, and drop some mana. But right now, this is a pretty damn good ring for like the build in terms of what it's giving me. So I've been just keeping it as it is. But you could just run another ring in this slot that's blue, and you're not really going to have problems, and you're going to be crit immune and curse immune. And if like, let's say worst case scenario, you're really struggling getting resistances for the build, you can just invest more into decks from the tree, and then you don't have to worry about decks at all on any of this stuff, basically, and you can just like lather on the resistances. So that's another way you can kind of go about this. Then the Amulet Slot, this amulet is pretty damn good. It's is a heavy mana focused amulet. It's not fully qualityed yet. I have to buy some more. It's just like so annoying buying things in this game. But what you want to do is basically, I've noticed in the amulet, if you're running this version of the build, you kind of want to get an amulet that has reduced reservation of the aura you're going to use. So whether that be like Hatred or Zealotry. This build is using Zealotry because it's using multiple types of of damage. Although now I could probably just use Hatred, to be honest, because we're doing mostly cold damage. But there's a little bit of fire here, as you can see. And, well, I guess it buffs the chaos too, which is always nice. But yeah. So Zealotry is what we're using. We found a Zealotry amulet. You could use Hatred or whatever. You want life. My first criteria was like the Zealotry shit, or the Aura shit, Crit Strike Multiplier, and life, right? And then I found this amulet and it was pretty damn good. And I just threw some mana, there was some mana regen on it, so I stuck with it. It's a pretty damn good amulet. It has some energy shield, which never hurts. Tossed a bit of mana on it. And that's like a really good amulet that I'm going to use for a long time. For the anoint, we obviously don't need to anoint. Usually in Totem build we would anoint Sanctum of Thought. But we don't need to anoint the Sanctum of Thought because of the Helm, obviously. I was anointing Totemic Zeal for a bit, but I don't actually think it's worth it. You just don't need it. Especially if you can get the totem placement speed on boots or something like that. So there's a bunch of anoint options, and I'm going to take you through some of them right now. So you could go Whispers of Doom. You know, there's nothing wrong with having an additional curse. It's just a lot of damage. You could go, what I ended up going was a Stormweaver. This is not as good now because initially my weapon had a lot of lightning damage on it. So it was like lightning, cold, we're getting a lot of effect. The good thing is it does have increased effect on damaging ailments, and we'll get into that in a second with how we shock with this build. But it also has like mana regeneration. So this like anoint has kind of like a lot going on with it. Definitely a solid anoint, especially if you're making use of a lot of lightning damage that comes with the build. You can obviously still anoint if you really need the placement speed. You can anoint this. You can anoint Flash Freeze here. This is a really good cheap anoint. Pretty good damage and pretty good projectile speed. Can't go wrong anointing projectile speed. You can anoint the minimum frenzy charges here. That's just 4% more damage and cast speed, I think. So that's super good. You could do Ballistics Mastery. I think if you were to do Ballistics Mastery, you'd be better off just doing Flash Freeze, though. Almost certainly. I typically tend to avoid anointing life nodes because like one individual life node is not really going to change as much versus having like 20% projectile speed or having like mana regeneration or stuff like that. If I were to re-anoint this neck, I might actually currently anoint it with Flash Freeze because I think it would just be more beneficial at the current moment, but I haven't re-anointed it yet. You could anoint the strength node. Like, I actually don't know where it is right now. There should be a strength node that gives like basically the effect of this one right here, the intelligence node. I wouldn't do that. I don't think it's worth it. It's going to be a very minimal HP and damage gain, but it's something you could potentially do. I think those are most of the really good anoint options. If you're using a shield, you could anoint Arcane Swiftness. You could also just redo the pathing to path there because it's kind of close. You could anoint Shamanistic Fury as well if you wanted, but I would just, if you were doing that, I would probably just anoint Totemic Zeal. So yeah, lots of different things you can anoint for sure. Those are the main ones, I think. So yeah, there's a lot of things you can choose there. Now you could also just anoint a crit multi node or something that you don't already have allocated. There's tons of those in the tree. So moving on to the other weapon. This is basically just going to be like a more traditional caster weapon, because keep in mind, Battle Mage only works for the main hand. So getting the added flat to the main hand is only going to work in that scenario. You're not going to be able to, if I duplicated the weapon here, it'd be a DPS loss. You need added damage to spells on this. So this is just going to be, again, I use the Temple mod. It's really strong, especially when you're running Zealotry. And this one has +1 cold, which is insane. Some spell damage. Yeah, just really good. This one doesn't have the final craft yet, but this is like relatively cheap. So I think it was like 510C. All the stuff here is like, except for I think this amulet was like 50C, 40C, something like that. Even this amulet wasn't super expensive, but that's probably the most expensive thing. This I think I paid 60C for at the time, but well, I guess the belt would be the most expensive thing, but I paid 60C for this at the time, but it's like really cheap now. This is obviously 6 link, so it's kind of a lot, but you can get like a 5 link one, super simple. 5 link prophecy is like 5C, and this is like 1C, so basically 5C for your chest. And then I need actually to re-enchant my boots. You either want the critical if you haven't crit recently, or the added lightning if you haven't killed recently. Either one of those works. Don't want the penetration on this one, because obviously we're using Inevitable Judgment. For this, added damage against burning enemies. To activate this, you're going to want at least some source of fire damage on your build. So, and because we're currently using this, it actually is helpful to have fire damage to spells on the other weapon, so that we can get the benefit from this. If I'm being perfectly honest, I think the optimal enchant here would be Elder Gloves with projectile speed. But these gloves I found early on for like 25 chaos or something, and they're just insane. They give mana, life, tri-res, high tri-res with the added flat. And the added flat on the Hierophant version, not be that impressive, right? Because it's not getting penned at all. On this version, it's kind of insane because it is getting penned with Inevitable Judgment, so it's just like more throughput damage. It's not really getting hindered in the same way it would in those other builds. So this type of Incursion mod, which is what that is, that gives the fire res and the flat added, is pretty insane. There's other Incursion mods as well that work off of shock and chill that you can use. But Freezing Pulse has a high damage effect on this, so this one's also pretty damn good, right? And then the boots, just trying to get a little chaos res where you can. These are not super expensive or anything like that. Like I said, use the other enchants, don't have them yet. And then throw some totem placement speed on there as needed. If you feel like you're fine without it, you go without it. You can also put totem placement speed on your neck. It's just kind of how this happened to work out. There wasn't room for it, because the Zealotry thing is a suffix and then it had the mana regen on it. But you can mix and match a lot of the stuff, which is really cool, because depending on what you find, you can do different things, right? So for example, like if you need mana regen, you can get it on your ring. You might not need it on your neck. You could get it, like I actually end up having mana regen on this. This is by accident, so I could probably take a mana regen roll off one of these and be fine. You know what I mean? So depending on where you get certain stats, you don't need them on the other places as well. There's a lot of interchangeability, which is nice when you're finding gear, because it just makes things much more flexible. The final piece here, obviously, this is the most recent addition, is Coward's Legacy. It's kind of hard to not justify using this, basically, because it's just so goddamn strong having low life, and you're already close to it, right? It boosts your freezing potential so much, and it does cost some health. But in my opinion, on softcore especially, it's just so worth it. Like, your offense is your defense to some degree. And the thing is, like, the build doesn't have a problem surviving. And I think if you ran 2 blue rings and it were crit immune, you would, like, be surprisingly tanky. Like, the build virtually never dies now. and you would die even less with that type of setup, right? So definitely something that I think you should work towards, and they're pretty affordable right now. So yeah, they're just really good item. The movement speed never hurts. The attributes we actually need. You could corrupt this ideally for something better there, but that's kind of like all this stuff is like it's more like late game, right? The helm is like the same thing, like start slamming that when you can. Run those incursions, double corrupt, slam this, slam everything you can, which is mostly those items, I would say. Like probably the helm and the this, because they don't have a good implicit or just don't have one at all. Now gem links, right? So let me go into the gem links. The Arcane Surge, Flame Dash, increased duration. This is pretty standard. You could add a what do you call the other thing? The green gem that gives you an extra charge of Flame Dash. I don't currently have that in this setup. For the Helm, this is the interesting one. So if you notice, we get +2 socket level gems of Helm. I recommend if you're buying this Helm, you want a good resistance value. You don't really care too much about the ES armor value, but you definitely want the +2 to socket gems, because this will apply to Enlighten, right? So right now we only have a level 3 Enlighten here. It becomes level 5 Enlighten, and at this point Enlighten is doing a lot of work, especially in conjunction with your neck, to lower your zealotry costs and your cost of your auras in general. I have like a level 21 clarity in here, which is saying, well, 2019 +2, right? Probably doesn't even need to be this high level, but we can really sustain it anyway, so it's not a huge deal. And level 22 zealotry, which is always nice. You could put an Empower in here. The problem with putting an Empower is then it adds like a mana cost to the auras, right? So we're kind of taking away from the Enlighten to buff the base of the auras. And since the auras are not, the clarity is flat, right? But it's flat mana regen, which we don't really care about that much, in the sense of like we don't need more of it. If we were using like a bunch of flat damage auras, then an Empower is a more interesting thought, but we're not. So I would stay away from the Empower there, and just run with this. But definitely put your auras in your helm, because it's OP as fuck. Lightning Golem, Sniper's Mark, increased duration, area of effect, Sigil of Power, Smoke Mine, and then Immortal Call, cast when damage taken. It's typical defensive setup with Vol Righteous Fire. Yeah, so this is our thing of power. You can get this powered up very quickly, and it's actually like a ton of damage, as you can see. That's an insane amount of damage while you're in here. Huge damage boost. And this is like, here's the thing with the Sigil Power. When this first came out, my thoughts on it were like, it's going to be really OP and really busted. Then I played with it a bit, and I was like, it's not really that OP or really busted. It kind of sucks being confined to that space. I put Area of Effect in, it got a little better. But here's the thing. You just need to take advantage of stuff like that when you can, and not try and force yourself into playing around it, right? So think of it as extra, as gravy, and not something that you're going to be in at all times. And if you have that mentality with it, it's going to be absolutely fine. If you are just obsessed with staying inside of the circle at all times, because you got to get max DPS, you are going to die a lot, because the build is not super tanky, and you're going to get hit by things that you shouldn't be getting hit by. And that's the thing that this build really can't afford to do, is it can't really afford, like I got 95 pretty easily. Funny story, actually had a bit of a problem at 91, 92, but the reason was because I had transitioned from using Kikizarus to the what do you call it? The Redeemer. I didn't have this at the time, so I was using Kikizarus, and then I changed them over to the Redeemer rings, and I had used the Intrinsic Catalyst to buff them, or not the intrinsic one, was it the defensive one? I forget which one it is. As the caster one, imbued, I think it is. To buff up the protection, the reduced effective curses to 40%. So I'd have the 100% with the what do you call it? With the Sanctum of Thought node here, right? Now, the Sanctum of Thought node was allocated from an anointment. So what I did is, at one point, around level 91 or 92, I had swapped my neck out to a better neck, and then replaced my rings with the... so I had 2 Redeemer rings, which were okay. I replaced them with slightly better rings, because I just had, like... Sometimes how I play is I'll have the searches open on my other monitor, and if something pops up that's good, I'll just buy it if it's cheap, right? So I just replaced the stuff, and I realized I didn't actually re-catalyst these. So these were both at 35%, and I didn't have an anoint on my new neck. So I was at like 70% reduced effective curses instead of 100. And that's why I was getting destroyed in like tier 16s, right? Because you can't really afford to be missing that much curse effect percent. I feel like in a tier 16 on a build like this, when you have all the curses on you at all times, basically, and you have not a ton of other defenses, right? But when I fix that problem, the build like rarely ever dies. Again, like you can't tank things. Like it's not like if you're standing in place on Sirius and you eat his die. I did survive that actually on this build, funnily enough, which might be because it's like damage from enemies hitting is unlucky while you have a magic item equipped, super powerful. But I did survive it like one time, I think on tier Awakener 6 or something. But yeah, you're probably not going to survive that on like Awakener 8. It's just, you're going to die. So you obviously can't get hit by stuff like that, but the build is surprisingly tanky, and you will not die a lot if you play properly with it. Because of all the freeze, there's some defensive layering going on, and just the fact that you're super mobile. So using this and trying to stay in it is going to get you killed in a lot of situations. But what you want to really use it for is high-value targets. So Conquerors, you can set up for them. You can set up for Sirius in a lot of cases when he's in between phases, right? You can set up for Metamorphs. One of the things I really love doing with this actually is Incursions, right? So before you start an Incursion, you'll put it on the ground, like right next to the start of the epicenter, and I'll spam it to get it to max. And then you'll place your totems in very separate places, right? So you got 1 totem here, 2 here, 2 here. You'll start the Incursion, pop all your flask buffs, and you have a big start with a huge buff of extra damage. So this is a super effective ability because we can pretty much reliably proc it to its max stage relatively quickly. That's the thing that makes it powerful, is we have enough mana cost and enough mana regen to take kind of a lot of advantage of it. But even in the event where you're only using it like on the pull, essentially, it's still a lot of extra damage and really helps out your burst window tremendously. Like when you have this popped, right, in max stage, watch this, with Evolve Righteous Fire and everything going, like you have a ton of damage. Imagine Evolve Righteous Fire on top of that. Imagine if you actually wanted to really twink the build out and get the Divergent Berserk and put that in there and you popped it at the same time. You know what I mean? Like, you can get an insane amount of damage on the pull with this. So make sure you include that in the build in some form or fashion, I would say. Now, onto the tree. So we've had to make a few compromises here. And I'm not sure how exactly I'd want the endgame tree to be. I might level this guy up a little bit more. I'm probably not going to take it to 100. You guys know it's just not my style. I typically don't like playing a build to 100. But I might play it to like 97 or something. And then I'll kind of update you guys on the point situation. The thing is, I'm going to highlight a lot of the stuff that I really like. So obviously this is just pathing, right? The reason why we path through here and up here is because we get a little bit of extra life, damage, and strength, which is all useful. And we're pathing by this jewel socket, and there's no jewel socket we're pathing by over here, right? So that's why like the 2 points that would connect here versus the 2 points that would connect here, these are better points in themselves, although the decks can be really valuable, I will admit. But it's really the fact that we're pathing by this extra free jewel socket. Granted, it's not as big of a deal now because you could just put the points in this socket and you'll be actually fine either way. But until you actually get Pain Attunement, you're not going to really be down here, so it would be 3 points. So you would be losing a point there. So you can kind of like deal with that depending on where you are in the gearing cycle, if you have the belt or not. Other things that I really like, so this is kind of all standard, right? Initially, I had Shamanistic Fury, but realistically, these nodes are just, they're outclassed as far as damage nodes, and if you don't need the placement speed, then there's no need to get them. They're super value if you need the placement speed, because they give you a good amount of placement speed with some pretty good damage. But if you don't need them, then they're just kind of like outclassed, because the problem is you need to be coming up here anyway to get this cluster because it's super powerful. Unless you want to just anoint Shaman's Dominion. That's another option you can do with your anoint, and you can save a bunch of points up here, right? So that's something you could do. You could connect through here, grab this, anoint Shaman's Dominion. There's a couple different ways you can do it, but if you decide to take Shaman's Dominion, which I think is pretty good because these are 20 multi-node, which is kind of insane. I think they're 20 multi-nodes because they're specifically for totems. Then pathing through here and grabbing this is kind of like a waste, right? There's like a lot of wasted points going through both of these segments. Frostwalker is just absolutely fucking insane. Like, this is like one of the most insane value nodes, especially like just starting out, needing res, cold damage, cast speed, like survivability, just absolutely bonkers. The nice thing about taking like this node right here to get you to Frostwalker is that if you ever need like quickly one of these resists, you can just pick up 15 resist in either of these slots, and you can still probably make somewhat benefit from the damage here in each case. You won't be like fully benefit from it obviously because you do mostly cold damage, but it wouldn't be like a terrible thing if you just, it's always nice to have like readily accessible access to more resist if you just need to snag a resist at some point, right? And then just pick up standard stuff. The mana and stuff is going to be very contingent on how much you need, basically. Like, you're going to have to kind of like do maps, get a feel on what you're comfortable with. I can show you my mana regen stats right now. This is what I feel comfortable with when I have Arcane Surge up. Something else I was doing before I had this belt is I was using the while moving 30% increased mana regen while moving from the Abyss Jewel in a Stygian Vice. That's super value and super good. Way to get some easy mana regen. Prodigal Perfection is something I definitely would recommend because you're just getting damage and mana here, so it's kind of like a no-brainer that you're going to want to include this one. This node was nerfed at some point, so it's not as good as it was before, but it's still pretty damn good because it gives you flat mana per second, and then this node's obviously good. You can kind of like mix around with these, right, depending on how much mana and or mana regen you need. You can take points out, put points in, so you can play around there. Coming through the top here allows you access to both Throat Seeker and Snowforged. Snowforged is just really nice because we are benefiting from the cold and fire a little bit because we do some fire damage, especially if you were to have a weapon that's like tri damage or something, or cold and fire. This would benefit you even more, but it's just really strong damage. It's crit strike, cold damage at the worst, 10 to cold and fire, super strong node. The fire node here is a bit better than the cold node, but it's still pretty good, especially because we're Inquisitor, so the crit really benefits us. Yeah, so that's super good. Coming over here, pretty much standard. You'll notice that I have Elemental Focus taken, and this is I'm gonna get into the cluster jewels that I'm using, but this is basically to boost our shock percentage. And yeah, the rest of it is very standard. Now, in terms of cluster jewels, so the first one I have is over here. It's Shrieking Bolts, chance to taunt on hit. This makes your totems taunt, I believe, and from what I've seen, it works. If somebody has like confirmation it doesn't work, then let me know. But I think this is like really good. Really helps keep the mob's attention off you. Just adds to your safety. Really good. Streamlined is the next best thing you can pair with this. Projectile speed's insane. 30 projectile speed, 20 projectile damage, and then a jewel socket. Can't really ask for anything better than that. And there's 5 decks on the intermittent ones, which is the best. You're only going to have one intermittent one here, but it is what it is. So in this, this one's, you want cold conduction, okay? And this is the effect of, this is the projectile medium, by the way, and this is the effect of non-damaging ailments medium. You want cold conduction. This is what you want, because when you chill something, it's shocked. It says your hits, but it's been confirmed to work with totems, and the shock baseline is 15%, which is huge, and you can augment that with things like elemental focus that give increased effect of non-damage ailments. So we have 20% here, right? We have 20% from Stormweaver. That's 40%. The first node in the cluster gives 10%. That's 50%. Then on the other side here, adjacent to it, we have 30% increased effect of lightning ailment, which is the one that we're trying to use here. So that goes up to 80%. We're gaining a little bit of lightning damage from lightning if we have any flat lightning or when we have sigil of power up there. And then we have, so that's 80%, right? And then we have 7% from the corruption on the first snow, 7% from the corruption on this first snow. So now we're at 94%. And I think there's something else here that gives effect. I don't know if it's on gear or something. That might actually be it. But regardless, that's like 94% increased effective shock on a base of 15. So we're basically getting 15% more damage from the combination of those nodes, if that makes sense. Which is pretty damn insane. Yeah, it's just like really, really strong. And on some nodes like this, it's like it's not even the only purpose of the node, if that makes sense, right? So like, yeah, we're getting other stuff with this, we're getting other stuff with this, like raw damage. You know what I mean? So it's like super worth, in my opinion, to invest in that stuff as long as you have cold conduction. Now, the one that we're missing is a totem cluster with Sleepless Sentries. And with Sleepless Sentries, you're probably gonna pair it with Ancestral Reach, which gives 25% totem damage, 25% placement speed, and then 25% placement range, I think, which is like how far away you can place the totems. It's somewhat noticeable, that cluster. It's not the end of the world if you have it or don't have it, to be honest. But it's just a nice thing to pair with the Sleepless Sentry node, which the Sleepless Sentry one increases the totem duration and gives you Onslaught. Now, the problem is that it's kind of hard to really get to another cluster jewel thing here, right? So you kind of have 3 options. The first option is you use the large, and then you branch off 2. Now, the problem with that is that the large one is not really typically going to be that good, and it's kind of eating into your points is the problem. And it's just going to take a lot to like put a large in here. There's like a lot more points you're going to need, right? And you can take things out, like you can spec out of this, then you're going to lose some of the shock effect. You can take points out of, maybe take a little bit out of your mana. You know what I mean? So you get like 4 points there. You could anoint this instead of this, and then, path directly to the bottom and save a bunch of points there. So there's things you can do to make that work, and I'm going to be like playing with various iterations. But that's kind of like a tough option, and you can just run the Onslaught Flask. The thing about it is that when you're playing Inquisitor, the other flask you'd really want to run, in my opinion, is the Wise Oak Flask that does the pen. Now, the pen is not going to help for Inquisitor, right? So if you're doing an Elementalist build, that option would be more enticing, basically. But doing the Inquisitor version, it's not anywhere near as enticing. And you could do, the other option you could do is an Atziri's Promise, which is a flask from both an offensive and defensive perspective, because it's 15% at its chaos, and then on top of that, it's 35% chaos res, which is no joke. So if you have it up a lot of the time, it's going to really help. It's going to especially help in those chaos specific rituals. And the other thing about it is that you have it all the time, which is good in boss fights, right? Because honestly, right now, you're going to have your Onslaught Flask. This is the reason why I have this flask setup, is because I was doing a no regen map, so I needed the mana flask. But typically, your flask setup is going to look like this. Life Flask, because there's not much regen on the build. Assault, movement speed, silver for Onslaught, and then diamond for crit. Now, this is up pretty much permanently when you're running the map. Especially if you're able to just be like chaining things, running from one thing to another, which is very easy on this build because you can move and your totems do damage. So the build is fairly quick and does a lot of damage for sure. And it's very easy to refill this flask. You're going to have it up permanently while mapping. Bossing, obviously, is just a different story. It's contingent on the type of boss, if there's ads, you know what I mean? Where we don't have any type of Pathfinder shenanigans going in any sense. Obviously, we're not a Pathfinder, but we don't even have anything that functions like that. So, just something to keep in mind there. That Sleepless Sentries is a really good node. Now, like I said, there's one option, you get the large jewel. Another option is you come down here and go out this and try and add another cluster in that way. Probably a similar number of points. If I had to guess, you're probably better off doing large into mediums than doing that. And then the other option is a Megalomaniac. The problem with a Megalomaniac is it's just random, right? Like if you find the right Megalo for this build, it's insane. Basically, you're trying to find any of the two main mods. Like ideally, you would find it would be Cold Conduction and Sleepless Sentries, or something like that, or because then you could get you could just put a normal one of these in with Shrieking Bolts, or if you found a Shrieking Bolts and Cold Conduction, then you would get a Totem cluster with Ancestral Reach and Sleepless Sentries, right? So getting a Megalo here is an option. Obviously, you could get a Megalo that has all three of those. Highly unlikely. If you did find that and it was not cost prohibitive, that would be clearly the best option by far. You could also use a Voices, but those are just, I believe, pretty expensive. So again, there's the cost aspect of it, right? So there's different ways you can go about solving the problem, which is really cool thing about PoE, right? Lots of ways to solve the problem. But some of them are definitely going to be better than others depending on what gearing level you're at and stuff like that. So there's that. Couple other things I wanted to touch on is there's a mod on rings, I believe, which is +1 to minimum frenzy charges. I think it can go on rings. That's something to also be looking for. It's really damage output. There's a mod. I think that one's from Betrayal, like crafting, and then I think there's one from one of the influences that goes on a shield. So if you are using a shield, that's an option. Although I don't necessarily think it's worth giving up an extra totem to get an extra frenzy charge. So like if you're going to be using a shield, you're probably going to be going for an extra totem, right? And I don't know if the influence is the same, right? Like, I don't know, or if maybe you can even craft the additional frenzy charge on the shield. I'm not entirely sure. But if you can do that, that's another option. Get a totem shield with a frenzy charge, maybe some damage on it or something. In terms of my view on, is it better to have 6 totems? Is it better to have 5 totems and the other damage thing? In most cases, it doesn't matter. I would say if you are picking up a shield, consider picking up glancing blows, making a couple sacrifices in the build to get glancing blows, maybe a little bit from the mana or something like that, or sacrificing this, because glancing blows is super powerful, not necessarily in overall throughput mitigation, but in terms of preventing you from getting one shot, right? Because 75% of the time, essentially, or like close to that, like 60% of the time, or 65 to 70% of the time, the damage from the hit is going to, you're only going to take 65% from it, right? So that's absolutely huge. Obviously, there's an RNG element there, but it's something to definitely keep in mind. So the shield also lets you use shield charge, which can give you fortify. So a couple other things, but this will definitely make you freeze harder. And I guess depending on the shield you got, you could actually get a shield that gave you like enough cold in some respect with an extra totem to get the similar amount of freeze. But because the only thing that's really giving you freeze here is the +1 and the spell damage and the elemental damage, right? But it's going to be harder to do that. So like the shield's going to be more expensive. This is cheap, right? The shields, like good totem shields, tend to be expensive. Shitty totem shields are shitty totem shields. So it's just up to you guys what you want to do with that. If you want a unique shield that's pretty good, the Light of Lunaris is actually really good. It has flat cold. The crit multi thing is really good. I'm not sure if you want to make sure you can try and proc the other thing where it's like if you haven't crit in X amount of time or something, or if your ability, like you have the let me actually check it out really quick, see what the wording is so I don't fuck it up. Light of Lunaris. If you've dealt a non-crit strike recently, so you could just use a brand or something like that for that, and you should be fine. The really good thing about Light of Lunaris is that it gives you a lot of block, so you're at 33% block, which is super helpful because like a lot of times you'd be at 28% block, and that's giving you essentially 10 more block with glancing blows because it's doubled. And then if you do decide to spec into totem stuff that's like based off block, it's just nice. Or a shield stuff that's based off block, it gives you the option to do that. But the shield is really good because you're potentially getting like, so this is like 30. Oh, actually, yeah. So you would be like 70. You'd get like 70 crit multi from Light of Lunaris because your block would be doubled. Or actually like 60. That'd be 66. That's what it'd be. And then if you proc the other thing, you would get even more multi. You get even more cold damage, and you get more crit, right? So Light of Lunaris is definitely a pretty damn good shield for this build. It just tends to be a bit expensive at the start. The prices, I think, come down now. So yeah, shields are definitely viable. Nothing about them is not viable. The last thing would be I want to talk about the Watcher's Eyes and then the Timeless Jewels. So Watcher's Eye, like I think the easiest thing to do here would just be to get like the multi one. You can get a bunch of the Clarity ones, which are pretty good. Some of them are kind of expensive though. The ES one isn't as good as it was because I think that they nerfed it, the one that gives like ES based on your mana. And the fact that we're not actually getting a lot of energy shield percent means that the flat ES that you do get isn't really getting scaled as hard as it might have been in other iterations of this build where I've used that Watcher's Eye. The precision one's really good, right? Clarity ones are good just in terms of helping out your regen. Like, they can really supplement your regen if you don't have good regen on gear. The Zealotry one is fine, but I think the only one that's really going to benefit you is the cast speed one, which is pretty decent. And then there's one where the Consecrated Ground, if the enemy's on Conk Ground, they take 10% more damage. I think the Precision one is just the easiest one to use out of them all. Obviously, if you get like multiple of these combined, it's insane, but that's just super expensive, right? So again, like, the sky is the limit there, but pragmatically, you're probably looking at the Precision Watcher's Eye, Clarity one, or a couple of the Zealotry ones that are on the cheaper end. And then Timeless Jewel. So I think the best Timeless Jewel to use would just be the one that would allow you to get more damage from your power charges potentially, and then just do like a power charge on hit setup with a brand. There's other ones that are kind of effective. You can't use the helmet one. There's no longer a Wind Dancer one, which would be pretty good because the build doesn't get hit that often. So that's unfortunate. You can use the Vol ones to gain more energy shield, but you're not gaining that much effective health, I feel like, because 50% of the damage is passing through, right? So again, like, I would more use those if I had if I was doing the leech version of the build, but I'm not currently, obviously. So yeah, I mean, you could do a leech version of the build still if you put the totem shield in the offhand. The reason why I wouldn't care too much to do it in this particular version is because we are taking up the belt slot. We're not going to be able to use the soul tether, which is going to mean that we're not going to have ES leech. We're not going to have overleech. But it is something you could do. It's not something that's off the table. It just depends on how you want to play, how much you like the leech. So there's options like that. There's also options where your life flask applies to your ES. That's a pretty decent one. But you only have 1,000 ES, so it's kind of like, I don't know what you think about that. I'd say those are the main options, really, right? This one build doesn't have one in there currently, but it's definitely something you could use. Obviously, I think that the most expensive, obvious one is the Divergent Berserk with Chainbreaker. But, I mean, that's just kind of like super expensive. It also could potentially cause you mana problems. But what you might do in that case is you would unspec all the mana nodes, go Chainbreaker, right? Try and let your natural regen or like regen on gear carry the rage regeneration. Then instead of using a damage flask in place of the onslaught flask, you would use a mana flask all the time to supplement your mana and keep your MOM going. And then you would just get onslaught you would use the points that you spec'd out of the mana on the tree to then get the Sleepless Sentries cluster, right? And then you'd have onslaught from that way. So that's a way you could definitely do it. But yeah, I think with that being said, we've pretty much talked to death about everything in this build. I didn't cover the Ice Spear thing. This build melts bosses when you go Ice Spear. Like, the damage is just insane. The absolute optimal setup would be to have one of these with like +1 spear, but that's obviously retarded and you're not going to do it, right? It's going to be so hard to get. If you get it, God bless. Or if you get one of these with a 30% Helm enchant, by the way, you want to be getting Freeze Pulse projectile speed, but it's super hard to get. So typically what you're going to end up doing instead is just using Ice Spear in place of Freezing Pulse, and you're going to put a Rain of Splinters in place of the basic Jewel Socket. Now, you can get one of these that has the Corrupting Blood Immune. That's really good for Sirius when you're doing the phase where he does the spinny stuff that rotates around. Or you can do what I have, and I have a different gem which has the double corrupted with just a little bit of damage, some crit multi for cold skills. And what I do is I swap this in place of the other First Snow when I'm putting both of these in, because if I'm putting this in and I'm going Ice Spear, I don't need the other first snow in, right? So I think that's the easier option, is find a cheaper jewel, because getting that on this is like somewhat expensive, whereas like you can get it on another jewel and just be fine. So that's the cheapest option. And you'll just like melt shit like Sirius and the Guardians and stuff like that with a 21 Ice Spear. And the optimal way to probably build that is like, instead of running faster casting here, I believe is the link you would remove, is you would run added cold, like a 21 added cold. And what that allows you to do is when you put the you swap over to Ice Spear, you'd also have a 2020 GMP, and you put that in place of the add cold, and it's going to give you a lot more damage. Right now, you don't really have a good thing to swap in for the GMP, because hypothermia is just a really good support, right? So yeah, it's probably not even worth subbing in. I could do the math. Maybe it is worth subbing in the extra projectile thing, but you would just sub in that for, like, you would make this a green and do that. So if I were to ever corrupt this chest, I would probably honestly corrupt it 1 red, 2 green, 3 blue, because that would give me the option of when I get the gearing right to change that in the future. You know what I mean? Because this is not the best link. I should probably go over the links, or it won't be the best link long term. This is my current links. These are going to change depending on your damage values, right? So crit multi is worth more at different points depending on what your other stats are. Cast speed is worth more at different points depending on what your other stats are. The one you're going to drop for something else, like I said, is most likely going to be cast speed at this point, from what I think at least. You'd have to go into PoB and check it, but I will put the PoB of this in the description. So that's pretty much the entire setup. And yeah, it's a lot of fun to play. Super strong. I'm going to be doing an Elementalist one, which is going to be way more tankier and kind of similar damage, but just like more maintenance is the thing. It's going to be less automatic than this, because you're going to have to actually put down your pen stuff, if that makes sense, like your Frost Bomb and your curses and stuff. But against single target, it's going to be have very similar damage. It's just against like trash and tier 16s, it might not quite have the same freezing potential, because you're not going to have you're not going to be ignoring the resistances. You're not going to be able to get the curses down on everything. You're not going to be able to get Frost Bomb down on everything. So this is like the very thorough guide for this, and I'll post a video of me killing some Conquerors or something, just so you can see the damage it does probably, and I'll link to that, and I'll link to the PoB. So thank you guys very much for checking this out. Hope you enjoyed it. Sorry it's been too long already, but I was trying to make sure I got the build in the optimal place, and I've been kind of doing a bunch of other things too while playing the game, playing other characters and stuff like that. So yeah, thanks for being patient, and hopefully you guys like it.